Cloud. Have any of you run a race? Children, have any of you ever won a prize, like a trophy or a medal? Now we know that God's children, we don't want to run the races of the world. We're running a different race from sports and competition. And today we're going to look at such a race. We're going to look at a real race and then also a worldly race. And we're going to look at a real winner. And it was a missionary who ran both races, and his name was Eric Liddell. And he was very, very famous. They even made a movie about him. But the second race he ran in his life was far more important than this worldly race he ran. Now, this missionary, he is from Scotland, just like the missionary we read about last time. Remember John Patton, who was missionary to the cannibals? So Eric Liddell was from Scotland. And he said this, I have promised God my best, and my best is to honor him. You see, Eric Liddell was a runner, and he was very, very fast. In fact, they thought he was going to be the fastest man in the world. He was a sprinter. And he was running a race when he was a teenager, about 17, 18 years old. And in this race, the runner next to him tripped him up, and he fell. But did he give up? No. Eric got up and started running. And he ran with all his might. You know, there's a verse in the Bible like this. A righteous man falleth down 7 times and riseth up again. And that's how we should be. When things happen in life, when we fall down, we just pick ourselves back up and we keep on running. Eric won that race, and he got the right to go to the Olympics as a young man. Oh, wouldn't that be every sportsman's dream to go to the Olympics? I don't think there's a worldly race that is more popular than the Olympics, and he won the right to go. But Eric refused to go to the Olympics, even though everybody wanted him to. You see, why would Eric refuse to go? Because the Olympics chose to do his race on Sunday. Now, we know that the Sabbath is not on Sunday, but Eric didn't know that. When he was a young man, he had not heard this truth. He thought Sunday was the Sabbath. And so he believed in keeping it holy. Eric would not work. He would not buy. He would not sell. And he would not train. And he certainly wouldn't race on what he thought was a Sabbath day. He wanted to keep it holy. Now, what do you think happened when this very, very famous athlete refused to go to the Olympics? Wow, they shamed him. And they put it in the newspapers and called him a disgrace. And people were so upset. And they tried bribing him, anything to get him to go and race on a day he thought was Sabbath. But then the most interesting thing happened. His coach said, you know, Eric, you can't run your race on Sunday, but you could run a different race on a different day. And so Eric did get to go to the Olympics, but he was competing in something he had never trained in. You see, Eric was a little shorter, and that's why he was such a great sprinter. And so he was going to run a race that very tall people usually ran in. So he was entering a race he'd never trained in and didn't really have a body to win in. But he went and trusted God. And right before he was about to run, somebody walked up and handed him a little note. And he pulled it out, and this is what the note said. But now the Lord saith, be it far from me, For them that honor me, I will honor. And yes, with all the odds against him, Eric won that race, the Olympics, 1924, and he made the newspapers once again. Now, he didn't just make the newspapers. He was given fame and glory and money, and he was about 21 years old. Now, most people who win Olympic Games, do they quit? No. They go on to race again and again, and they get sponsors, and they're famous all over the world. But Eric Liddell, he didn't want any of that at all. There was something far more precious to Eric Liddell. Do you know what that was? What did Eric Liddell love more than fame and glory and running? Eric Liddell. You know, he wasn't born in Scotland. He was born in China, and he was born to missionary parents who loved God. In fact, his parents loved God so much that when Eric Liddell was just 6 years old, they wanted to give him a better life. And they put him on a boat and they sent him back to Scotland so that he could learn how to read and write and how he would one day grow up and be a missionary for God. And so he did just that. He grew up, and as a young man of 22, he left the world behind and he decided to be a missionary for God because he said this, Christ for the world needs Christ. Oh, what love. And so this Scottish man went all the way back to China where he was born. Now, the time period that he went to, things had settled down right before there was a revolution in China. And do you know what they did to the Christian missionaries? Oh, they killed them. And so Eric Liddell was going back to China at this time period. Now, they weren't eating the missionaries like the cannibals were, but they still were killing them. And so Eric Liddell, he had gotten married, and he had two little girls, kind of like Patience and Isabella, two little girls. And he raised them up in China, and there was some peace there. And so for about 15 years, he was peacefully serving the people in China and teaching them about God. But then something happened. World War II started to happen, and the Japanese were invading China. And so Eric had to put his family that he loved on a ship, just like his parents did with him, and sent his wife and his two little girls all the way to Canada. Now we have here in our church a man from Canada. So Canada has been very receptive for missionaries. And so that's why Eric sent his family there. And what did Eric do? Why didn't he go back with his wife and his two little girls that he loved? Because God had called him to share the gospel in China. And he couldn't leave, even though the country was under attack. So what did he do? He couldn't preach the gospel in church anymore because they were bombing the churches. He became a medic. And what he would do is go find sick people, starving people, and he would help them. Now, he was still very, very fast. And they weren't using cars back then. And he was so fast, he wasn't even using horses. He was using his fast little legs that God gave him. And you could see now why. You could see why God had blessed him in that competition and why he had him train. And so he could run very fast. And what did he do here in this picture? Why, he would put the sick and the injured in a cart. And he would act like a horse. And he would run very, very fast. and take the injured to safety, as we see here. And then he'd take them to a little makeshift hospital, and he would tell them about Jesus and how much Jesus loved them, even in war, that they could trust him to care for him. And then the war escalated to what we call Pearl Harbor. The Japanese invaded deep into the North Country, and they captured all the missionaries. And where did they take them? Why, look at all these missionaries being taken away, and they were put into a prison. Now, these were some of the missionaries and some of the people that Eric Liddell was captured and taken with. And if you look really closely, you're going to see there's a lot of children. Oh, Eric Liddell was so encouraged. He was able to get his little girls to safety and his wife. But these little kids, God had another plan for them. And so they went all together into this prison. There were over 2,000 people, over 300 children. Oh, it was awful there. Little children, do you know what this stuff is? Why, this is barbed wire, and they put it all around the prison so that nobody could ever leave the prison. And it wasn't a very nice place for children. It wasn't beautiful, and there was no games. There was nothing fun. There was no school. There was no activity, nothing for the children to do. But Eric Liddell brought something to that prison. He brought the love of God. And even in this prison, Eric Liddell was determined to try to help these little children love God and believe that even in prison, God was with them there and would not forsake them. So what did Eric Liddell do? Well, he started organizing a school for the little kids. Now, they didn't have like crayons and picture books, but Eric Liddell was able to tell them and talk with them and teach them how to read and write. Why, they could write in the dirt. And he would use whatever means he could find to teach the children. And he would play with them and made this prison a good place for these kids. And they saw that God loved them through the care that Eric Liddell was bringing them. Newspaper headlines would post this about Eric Liddell. Eric Liddell, the record-breaking Olympian who kept hope alive in a Japanese prison camp. You see, he truly was the leader of that camp. You see, the men are very, very starving here. They had very little food, but they had the food that God gave, the most important food of all. And I love what Paul writes in Philippians 4:11. Not that I speak in respect of want, for I have learned in whatsoever state I am, therewith to be content. And so, little children, in this life, we may find that God allows us to go into places that aren't fun, but we can know that God is with us there and that he will never leave us, and we can trust him. Eric Liddell said this: many of us are missing something in life because we are after the second best. I put before you what I have found to be the best, one who is worthy of all our devotion, Jesus Christ. He is a savior for the young and the old, and only he is the one who can bring out the best that is in us. Lord, here I am. You see, Eric Liddell, he never saw freedom. In fact, shortly before they did free all the captives, he died. He did not know what was causing his illness. I read his biography. He blamed himself when he was having trouble teaching the kids and couldn't remember things and getting headaches. He had no idea that he had a brain tumor. And while he was dying, you can see here this very top room, they put the sick and the suffering up at the top. he sent a note down and he asked if they would play his favorite hymn. They had scrounged together 3 instruments and they played his hymn, his favorite hymn of all, right before he died the next day at age 46. Be still, my soul, the Lord is on thy side. Bear patiently the cross of grief or pain. Leave to thy God to order and provide. In every change he faithful will remain. Be still, my soul, thy best, thy heavenly friend, through thorny ways leads to a joyful end. Oh, it does lead to a joyful end. Even though we may go here, we have Jesus by our side, and our end is here. I press toward the mark for the prize of the high calling of God in Christ Jesus. It is my hope for each of us that we will run this race and we will win this prize. Amen.